If you're planning on quilting your quilt by hand, then one of the techniques you might want to try is hand tying your quilt. But what is that and how do you do it anyway? In this video, I'm giving the basics about what you need to start with your hand tying your quilt. And then in the follow-up video, I'm teaching you exactly how to do it. So who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You are very, very welcome. Let's find out all about hand tying your quilt. Well, what does it mean to hand tie a quilt? And this is it. This is hand tying, and this is a tinsy wincy little sample because it fits under the camera, and it's a weird shape because this was when I did my City and Guilds qualifications and it was part of that. But let's move on. Right, hand tying is where we are creating little knots by hand through the fabric, and you can see there's a little knot on the back there, and we get a knot on the front. You can do the knots on the back as well, but that's essentially what it is. We are tying a knot through all of the 3 layers of our quilt. But why would we do this? Well, you can see already it's actually quite interesting. We can get some really interesting textural effects if we hand quilt. And if you use strands, you can get all this little fluffy effect. So if you use lots of strands, you can fluff it all up and get a really good, interesting effect with your hand quilting or your hand tying your quilts. With hand tying, you tend to space your knots a bit further away, and I appreciate these are close together. As I said, this is a small sample I did for my City and Guilds, but normally we separate them out and we have a bigger space than we might have normally with hand quilting. And that enables your quilt to have a puffier feel to it. So the more puffs we have in a quilt, the more air we trap, and the more air we trap, the cozier it is. So we like that. So we get a puffy look, and we get lots of interest and some texture with our knots. It's also really good if you are if you've got a thicker quilt, maybe you've got a really thick wool batting or wadding in the middle. Actually, hand tying is much easier to get through all those layers than perhaps your machine might like. And that kind of brings me on to hand tying anyway. It is really easy, and I'm going to show you that in the next video, but just know that it is pretty beginner friendly once I've shown you how to do it, and it's easy to do and you can pretty much do it anyway. So that is about hand tying and what it is. But there are 2 things you're going to need. You're going to need needles and you're going to need threads. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about the thread then first of all, and we've got a variety here, but really your limit is your creativity. But we need 2 things working for us. First of all, we need our thread to be strong because we're going to go through those layers and you're going to be pulling the thread through a couple of times and tying a knot. So you want the strength in the thread. You really don't want it snapping halfway around your quilt. That's not good. So we don't want that, but we do want a thick thread as well. So we want strong and thick, and that will please everybody. Did I just say that? We want a thick thread, and the reason why we want a thick thread is because it will show up on our quilt. Okay, so we've got a variety here. We've got a perle cotton, which you can see straight away how thick that is. If I compare that to a standard machine quilting thread, can you see the difference in those 2 threads there? That yellow really is a lot thicker than the pink there. So a perle cotton, then there's all sorts of varieties of perle cotton, colors of perle cotton or pearl cotton, including the variegated as well, which is very pretty. So there's those. You can also choose stranded cotton. So this is just standard embroidery floss or stranded cotton, and those 6 strands really make they're thick and they're strong in combination. But you remember I said that you can get this textural look and you can fluff up lots of strands. Well, you can achieve that look using stranded cotton. So that's something that you might want to consider. We can use a crochet yarn, as I've got here. I'm not a crocheter. Crochet. What is a crocheter? What is somebody who crochets? Is that a crocheter? Anyway, if you're a crocheter, that's I'm sure there's a collective term for crochet. Put a comment below, whatever the collective term for crocheter is. Anyway, standard crochet cotton, or a crewel wool, you can use that as well. So it's not so thick that it's going to take over, but you'll get a good effect with the crochet yarn there. Okay, yeah, you can have a laugh at my expense. And then it's not last, but definitely not least. It's not even last because, as I said, there's no really real limit to the thread. You want thick and strong, and then go and find thick and strong and play with your imagination. But we can obviously use machine quilting threads. There's no problem with that. However, these are quite thin, so it really depends on the look that you are going for. I'd probably go a little bit thicker than that, but you could use that depending on what you're doing with it. The hand quilting thread. So this is Gutermann, and it says on the spool quilting. Sorry, let's move that into the screen. Can you see that? It says quilting, and it's this sort of beigey, slightly pinky, but beigey spool. If you find these are not for your machine. If you feel it, it's very silky, and that's a dead giveaway. It is not for your machine because this is all covered, or the thread has got a covering of wax, which won't ruin your quilt. It won't do any harm to your quilt at all, but it makes your life a lot easier when you are hand quilting. But it will do harm to your machine, which is why we only want to use it for hand quilting. So I know it's a mistake that a lot of quilters fall into, is they'll pick this up thinking this is quilting thread and you can put it merrily in your machine. You can't. Just use it for hand quilting. But for hand tying, absolutely perfect. And this is a bit thicker than the pink as well. If I can unhook a little bit of this, it's got a knot in it. Where did that come from? Let's find this pink thread and show you the difference between those. Whether you can see this on camera is anybody's guess, but I think you can just see there that the white with a knot is slightly thicker than that pink there. And when you're doing that, it would still be quite a thin knot when you're hand tying, but you know, it depends on the look that you are going for. And of course, when you are hand quilting your quilt, you can absolutely combine methods. So you can hand quilt in big stitches and then use your hand tying for some textural areas, or you can indeed machine quilt and then come back and do a little bit of hand tying in certain areas to add some interest or a look or a texture or whatever. There's no rules with this. It's up to you and your creativity and what you're trying to achieve. But that's the thread. So having talked about the thread, let's go and talk about the needles. What we're looking for with our needles is a long eye, and you want the eye big enough for you to get your thread through. Certainly if you're using stranded cotton, you'll know that you need a bigger eye to get that through. And when we're dealing with thicker threads anyway, we need an eye big enough. So you want a long eye and one big enough to get your thread through. So for instance, we've got one here. By the way, look, I found this. I was looking for these needles and I found this, and my mum made this, I think, when she was in her 20s, and bless her, she's been gone from us for about 10 years now, and she would have been 77. So this is actually quite old. this little needle case. However, mum came through for me and I found some needles. We have got a longer eye on this, so this will fit our pearl cotton quite easily. So you're looking for crewel, as in crewel, so crewel or embroidery needles. And you can see here we've got a pack of embroidery needles here, which I found in my sewing box. These are quite short. The eye is quite small, but it really depends on the thickness of your thread that you're trying to get through. So you'll probably need to try a few to find out. I've got a wool needle here, which would be good for our crochet yarn. So can you see that there's a thicker eye on that one? Again, this is a bit rusty, but this is very old. I think this might have been my nana's. and she died when I was 2, and that's a long time ago. It's good, isn't it? We inherit all these things from generations, and I think it's really good that we give them life and we bring them through to future generations. But we can see here, rusty or not, that we've got a bigger eye on the top here. But the other thing that you're probably going to need to look for is the end, because what we want is a sharp enough point that we're going to get through the layers of our quilt. If it's a ball point, like a lot of the cross stitch needles are, those embroidery cross stitch needles, they won't go through your quilt so easily. So try and get this combination of a bigger eye, a longer eye, and a sharper point, and then that should do you fine. But what I suggest is give them a go, get it threaded up with the thread of your choice in the needle that you found, and go through your quilt and see how it works. And if it doesn't go through easy enough, you probably want to increase the size of your needle, and it should go through a lot easier then. Part 2 of this video, which will be out next week. So if you're watching this really live, you're going to have to wait a week for it to be out. But if you're watching this in the future, then it should pop up on the screen about now over, no, that's that side of the screen. And in that video, I'll be showing you how to actually tie your knots and give you some variations of things that you can do. And I'll get really close up with my camera so that you can follow along and do that with me. So definitely watch out for that. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, then you won't miss out on that video, or indeed any of my future weekly tips and tutorials. I hope that has helped. I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.